So today we are looking at two more chapters in the sports performance book. Again, I know your cover looks different than this. We are in that NASM PS book. We're in this one here with the dude jumping really, really high. So we are currently hanging out in this textbook right here. And so we've got to go over, we're going to do a little bit of cardio today, which will finish out our warm-up section that we started talking about on Friday. And then we'll also talk a little bit about core training. So we're going to introduce the movement prep section. We'll start to get into that. So if we're kind of, these PowerPoints are sort of working their way through sort of an OPT template here, right? Like this is the sheet that we use to write our workouts in. So far, we've addressed sort of half the warm-up stuff. We're going to finish it up by talking about cardio here. And then today we're going to dive into this first section. We'll get core in today. So we'll fill in like maybe these first two lines here, and then we'll be looking at balance and reactive training tomorrow. And then we'll get into SAQ after that, and eventually we'll get all the way into the resistance stuff. So getting back to the getting back to the cardio training. Today's lesson will also be talking a little bit about energy systems and how we generate like ATP, which is your body's fuel to do everything. So we are going to get into a little bit of like physiology today. Don't worry about getting too heavy into this stuff. We actually have an entire class, like 12 days dedicated to exercise physiology, where we're going to make this stuff a little bit more clear, but we will be mentioning energy systems really briefly. So sometimes that can get a little technical. If you do have any questions, please feel free to ask. But if it seems like I'm moving like past it pretty quickly, it's because I know we're going to teach this much more in depth, particularly coming up in the next, actually at the start of the next module, we'll be going over this really in depth. But I love questions, so please, if I'm moving a little bit too quickly on the ATP stuff, just let me know, because sometimes that stuff is hard to quantify. So our objectives today is to describe like the integrated training approach to cardiorespiratory training and the guidelines for how to do that. We will talk about the importance of interval training and why that is so good for us, and then we'll design a cardiorespiratory program. So a lot of times cardio is often the most underrated component of training. I feel like most people, it's the number one thing they want to skip in their workout routines. Cardio either is your favorite thing or your least favorite thing. I feel like there's no in between. You got some people who are like, it's like, hey, did you how were your workouts this week? It's like, oh, I went for a run. And it's like, okay, they love cardio. And then talk to somebody else that's like, did you do your cardio? And they're like, no, but I did the strength training part, like there's no in between here. So looking at cardiorespiratory training and its benefits, right? It obviously, if we're talking about athletes, is very good at improving performance. It reduces your mental anxiety, which is really good. Cardio is a great way to produce a lot of endorphins. When you are producing like all the stress hormones that come along with like this long duration exercise, it can be really, really good for you. And then obviously there are like weight management benefits to this as well. Cardio does burn a consistent amount of calories. Or a consistently high amount of calories. Not that strength training doesn't burn calories, it absolutely does. But sometimes like with rest periods and things like that in between sets, which you need to be able to like work hard in your next set, there's like a little energy gap there. Cardio at least is like very consistent in how it burns calories. It's very easy to kind of count to a specific number, so it can be used for weight management pretty effectively, right? And then actually, sorry, last and biggest, most important thing, it both improves your aerobic and your anaerobic energy system. So if we're talking about our energy systems, just to give a quick review here, the way that our body produces energy, like we take in glucose and we take in oxygen, and we use those two things to create this high energy molecule called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, which is much easier to say. And basically, this is what an ATP molecule kind of looks like. You can see here, it's a molecule of what's called adenosine, which we see here, right? Which is a little adenine attached to a little sugar called ribose. And so there you go. You got your adenosine molecule. And then it's called adenosine triphosphate. Actually, here's a much better picture. Adenosine, they call it a triphosphate because there are 3 little chemical phosphates that are attached to that molecule of adenosine. And they're right here, right? Here's a phosphate, here's a phosphate, and here's another phosphate. And so this is what a molecule of ATP looks like. Now, what you'll do is you'll kick this third molecule, this third phosphate off. Basically, we break the little chemical bond that's holding this together. You can see like there's a little oxygen bond holding them all together. So if we break this little oxygen bond right here, what's going to happen is that third phosphate shoots off. You can see there's 3 up here, right? And then down here, there's only 2. So you're left with ADP, you're left with adenosine diphosphate, right? We kick this third phosphate off. And when that happens, you know, I don't know if you guys know about how atom bombs work. You know, I'm certainly no expert, but like, that's what like, you know, atomic energy or like an atomic bomb, right? What it is, we split atoms. We took, you know, the smallest thing in the universe and we broke it in half, you know, like, and when that happens, what, you know, huge explosion, right? Like lots of energy gets released. Well, that's kind of what's happening here. When we break the bond in an ATP molecule, when we break that little bond there, a ton of energy gets released. And our body cells capture that energy and they use that energy to do stuff, you know, like all the stuff. It uses all that energy to do literally everything that we are doing all day long. So when you think about like what eating is and what breathing is, like both of those things, the only reason we're doing that is so that we can get the ingredients necessary to produce ATP. That's what your metabolism is, right? We bring in oxygen to allow you know, us to produce ATP molecules. We bring in glucose to produce ATP molecules. So that's what ATP is, right? Adenosine triphosphate is a high energy molecule that our bodies use as fuel for all of our metabolic activities. So brief summary of that, right? There's a lot of energy trapped in between in between the phosphates bonds. And when those bonds are broken, energy is released. Our bodies capture that energy and they pay that energy, you know, in order to do work, right? That allows us to do work. So you can think of it as molecular currency if you want. And it's like, how many squats do you want to do? All right, that'll be 15 ATP, you know? That's kind of how ATP works. Now, we can produce ATP in a couple different ways. There's a couple different ways that we produce ATP, either with or without oxygen. Okay, so if we're producing it with oxygen, we call that aerobic energy production, or aerobic ATP production, or aerobic respiration is actually a term that we use because it is like, you know, kind of breathing in a way. Or we do it without oxygen. And if we do it without oxygen, we call that anaerobic, for opposite of aerobic. It doesn't require oxygen, right? So this PowerPoint goes in kind of a weird order. It starts aerobic and then goes to anaerobic and then it goes back in the end. So I'm going to get back to the notes here in just a second. But so if we're talking about the aerobic system, because that's the one that we spend most of our time in, your aerobic energy system is where you guys are like right now. Like all the stuff you're using right now, you probably have been using for at least 2 or 3 minutes at this point. You've probably been using it for hours, you know, like it's the stuff that you've been using consistently, right? Like think about like the hierarchy of like, you know, nutritional needs that you have, right? Like you can go several days without food. You can go a day or 2 without water, not even that very well. But you can go only a couple minutes without oxygen, right? So oxygen is something that we need a lot of because that allows us to keep our cells alive by producing this energy, right? We also need water in order to be able to transport things around. And we also need glucose to be able to like, you know, produce ATP as well. So taking water out of the conversation and just looking at like glucose and oxygen. Oxygen we need lots of to be able to like create energy. And we do need glucose, but we can also create energy from fats as well, as long as we have sufficient oxygen to be able to do it. So it doesn't always have to be glucose. Your body can rely on fats instead. This is why the keto diet has become so popular, in the last few years. It's not necessarily better than a regular diet, but it has been, it is something that like primarily relies on fat. Like that is a true sentence. Doesn't mean it makes you any better at losing weight or any better at losing fat. It just means that like, yes, it's true that it is burning fat as a primary fuel source. So when people hear that, it's very easy to market as like, well, that's perfect. That's what I want to lose. I want to lose my fat, right? So it's a very easily marketed kind of situation here. So reviewing the energy systems, right? Like I said, you have your aerobic energy system. This is where you guys are right now. Like I've been talking for at least 2 minutes at this point. I've been sitting upright for longer than 2 minutes. I've been awake for quite a while, right? Like all of the stuff that's being used right now has been being used for quite a while. But I've got some muscles that I'm not really, I've got some stuff I'm not really using right now. Like, I'm not necessarily like sprinting down the street right now. I'm just kind of sitting here, right? So that's very much in an aerobic situation right now, right? Now, let's say I start sprinting as hard as I can down the street, right? Like, and I mean like maximum effort, right? Well, what's going to happen is like, I'm going to start using some of the stored up energy from the last time I created ATP in all of like the muscles that I'm using currently to do this very hard, very heavy duty sprint. But eventually like that stored energy is going to run out. In fact, it's going to run out in about 5 to 10 seconds. And then what's going to happen is my body is going to start producing energy on the go to kind of catch up, right? And it'll do it in a really, really, really fast energy system that actually doesn't require oxygen. It's actually going to do it in an energy system that is what we call anaerobic. It actually doesn't require any oxygen because what will happen is it can produce massive amounts of ATP really, really quickly. The problem with using that energy system, and it's not really a problem, it's actually a very good thing, but it feels like a problem because you're going to, after I hear what I have to say, is that it produces a lot of lactic acid, which some of you guys are probably going, oh yeah, that stuff sucks. Like that's the stuff that makes my legs feel like they're 1,000 pounds when I'm like trying to get up a hill, you're like when you're a kid and you're riding your bike and then all of a sudden it starts burning like crazy because you're trying to go uphill. That's very much your anaerobic energy system, right? And so I started using the anaerobic energy system because I started doing very intense work, and it has to be a very short duration. I can't do high intensity for a very, very long time. So I can stay in that anaerobic energy system if I'm really good at it, maybe even up to about 2 minutes, but honestly, probably about 60 seconds or less for in general, right? So what's going to happen? I still need to be able to produce energy. But now I can't do this high, I can't do this high intensity stuff anymore, but I'm still like, I'm starting to slow down a little bit, but I'm still trying to like jog my way along. Well, I'm going to settle back into that aerobic energy system, right? So this is how you kind of want to think about it, right? You want to think of your aerobic energy system. You can see it here. This is your main energy system in general, because it's the energy system that we use when you are at rest or when you're doing like light activity. It's your long duration, low intensity energy system. When you think about the difference between like a sprinter and a marathoner, right? A marathoner is primarily training their aerobic energy system, and a sprinter is primarily training their anaerobic energy system. So the anaerobic energy system is the very high intensity one that we use. Think of it as like, what is nitrous, right? Like think of it as like, when you like in a spy movie or an action movie or whatever, it was so popular like back during like the beginning of like the Fast and Furious era. Now Fast and Furious is all over the place, but like back when those movies started, it was all about like, it's like cars that had the little booster button, like you can kind of think of like that's what your anaerobic energy system is. It's your jet fuel, like but it only lasts a little while, right? And that's why we have to have our aerobic energy system, which is going to allow us to have prolonged sustained work. So your anaerobic system, also known as your glycolytic system, because that process is known as glycolysis, metabolizes ATP. It creates ATP in the absence of oxygen. But it uses glucose as a fuel source, and it has a high amount of power, but it has a limited capacity because it's also producing lactic acid at the same time. think of it as like sort of a byproduct, right? So you get this really great molecule of ATP. You also get a whole bunch of lactic acid that kind of comes along with it. And that lactic acid, like I said, is what's really making your muscles burn like crazy. So if we take a look at our energy systems, if we look at like anaerobic versus aerobic energy systems, we found like a good picture here. Oh, that's so close. I love those arrows. I do want to pull this actually. We're gonna see this picture, I think, in the power. Am I gonna see this slide? Starting to get my slides mixed up. I gotta remember like which class I'm teaching. Yeah, no, it's not gonna show up. All right. Duration. There it is. So this is what we're looking at. All right. So think of it this way, right? Like this is sort of the, like I said, what's kind of hard about this chart is like what sometimes gets confusing to people who are new to studying this stuff is that like we're sitting in the aerobic energy system right now, right? But as our intensity climbs, it's almost like resetting, and then you kind of work your way through this arrow, right? Like you go from low intensity, and then you start sprinting, and you're trying to sprint as hard as you can, and then eventually, like you just can't keep it up anymore, right? Like you have to slow down, right? And so like you're in this system, then you're in this system, and then eventually you kind of settle back into your aerobic energy system, right? Think about like whoo, like you're settling back into aerobic. So you can see if we look at this, I'm just actually going to kind of make my own chart here because I'm not really getting what I want off the internet. If you think about like what the durations are of these energy systems here, I'm just going to kind of copy this, and actually we really only need this top part here. It looks kind of like this. If we think of like duration, this right here is what we call your ATP PC system, right? That stands for adenosine triphosphate phosphocreatine system, okay? This is short duration, maximum intensity. Okay, that's what this system is. It's short duration, absolutely maximum, as hard as it can get intensity right here. Okay, that's the ATP-PC system in a nutshell. And it only lasts, like I said, maybe like 6 to 10 seconds duration at max. I mean, like, it really does not last that long. So that's the ATP-PC system right here. So you're basically, what's kind of funny is you're not even necessarily creating a bunch of ATP in this energy system. The ATP-PC system is ultra high intensity, ultra low duration work. So 5 to 10 seconds here. If you think about doing like a maximum strength lift, right? Like let's say you go, your 1 rep max is, let's say 200 pounds. And you go put 195 pounds on that bar, you're probably going to only be able to do 1 or 2 reps. You are using your ATP-PC system. So you go from aerobic while you're kind of sitting around, and then, you get down on the ground and you grab that bar. It's really, really, really heavy. And then like, you kind of brace your core. And then all of a sudden, the second you start lifting it, your muscles are like, whoa, we need to create energy right now because we're trying to lift something super, super heavy. So it goes right into that ATP-PC system, creates as much energy as possible in as short a time as possible. And then that system is tapped out. It's exhausted 10 seconds in. So this is why, and this is a note for those of you who have already seen some of our program design classes, like Andres, Bay, Dalen, this is why the power phase of the OPT model, or the maximum strength phase of the OPT model, you only do 1 to 5 reps if it's the heavy lift, or maybe 8 to 10 reps if it's the super explosive, super fast light lifts. Like the duration is short because the intensity is super, super high. Okay, so that's our ATP-PC system. So that's the first one you're going to, and here's the thing, you're also going to actually use that system, even if it wasn't super heavy, when you first grab the bar. So even like, let's say I'm, lifting, at 200 pounds is my maximum, but I'm lifting 100 pounds. That's like 50% of my 1 rep max. That's really low, right? So I'm going to use the ATP PC system for about 5 to 10 seconds, like I said, right? 6 to 10 seconds, depending on who you ask. I put 6 up here because I got so used to doing that years ago, but let me fix that because I want to go with let's go with the NASM approach to things. I do want to be only NASM accurate. So we'll say 5 to 10 seconds because that's what they say. So you think about like, we see 5 to 10 seconds duration max, but I'm lifting at a very light weight. So I use that, and then my body's like, all right, well, we're going to pass this off to the other energy system. This is like, meant to get you started. This is like kindling for a fire, which makes a really big flame, but maybe not like a very long burning one. Then we switch over into glycolysis, okay? And glycolysis is usually what we associate with like bodybuilders, right? Or actually like a lot of like professional athletes as well. But this is glycolysis, okay? And that is a medium, well, and we'll say like short, we'll say it's short to medium. Short to medium duration, which means that it is also, medium intensity, right? Like, it not a very long energy system here. This is going to last anywhere from about like 30 seconds up to at a very, max, we'll say like 1 minute, because that's actually how NASM lays that out as well. So this energy system, glycolysis, is your medium intensity stuff, right? When you think about like lifting heavy weights, right? When you think about like lifting heavy weights, it's usually something you can do for what? Maybe 6 to 12 repetitions if it's relatively heavy. Now, if you're lifting really low, you probably will lift more than that, right? So if I'm lifting about 6 to 12 repetitions, which is going to take me maybe about 30 seconds to get through a set, right? That is going to be glycolysis. Now, what if I do slow repetitions? What if I do ultra slow repetitions and I only get 4 reps in, but it takes about 30 seconds up to a minute? That's still glycolysis, very much so. This is a duration-based situation, not a repetition-based situation, which is a common misconception. The reps are based on the duration, not the other way around. So you can see, right, this is my medium intensity stuff. That's great because this means that I'm getting the benefits of like a little bit of cardio, but I'm also getting the benefits of lifting nice and heavy weight, right? So glycolysis is the middle system, right? It's not the super high intensity stuff, but it's also not low intensity stuff, right? So we think about this. This is metabolizing ATP. It's creating ATP. It doesn't need any oxygen yet, right? So this is used for high intensity, low duration work, anywhere from about 30 to 60 seconds. The main fuel source here is glucose, okay? So your body is taking in a molecule of sugar, molecule of glucose, and it's breaking it down and converting it into ATP, but it's also creating a little bit of lactic acid as a byproduct, right? This is your heavy intensity lifts. It's not your maximal intensity lifts, but it is heavy intensity lifts, right? Now, let's say we keep going along our little chart here. Duration continues, right? Well, then we eventually get into our aerobic energy system. And your aerobic energy system is the true, long duration sort of system here. I should put a box around these so this chart's a little bit cleaner. Actually, I guess I can. So your aerobic energy system, right? This is going to consist of 3 things. This is the most complicated energy system. The aerobic one is pretty complex because there's actually 3 systems taking place here. There is aerobic glycolysis, which we don't talk too much about. Aerobic glycolysis. Basically, that's acting as like the stopgap between regular glycolysis and the rest of your aerobic energy systems. It is the Krebs cycle, which is sometimes known as the citric acid cycle, and it's the electron transport chain. Okay, so that's a lot of stuff. This is long duration, low intensity work. Okay, and that is going to be anything. We'll say greater than 2 minutes in length. So anything longer than 2 minutes, you are in the aerobic energy system. That's how I know pretty much everybody in this call right now is in the aerobic energy system, like currently, because you've been using your core muscles that are keeping you sitting upright. You've been using, whatever to keep your eyeballs open. Like you've been using that for quite a while at this point, at least longer than 2 minutes. So those are our 3 energy systems. Now there's another chart that kind of explains this as well that I really like right here. You can see this little graph here kind of shows you, right? Think about like where your energy is coming from. You can see this line represents your immediate energy system. This is that ATP-PC system. And it's like down here, we've got duration. And here it's like percentage of energy system. It's like, well, if the duration's under 10 seconds, 100% of your energy is coming from that ATP-PC system. And then look at this chart. Like it's like, just drops off. It's like, we did it. And then it's exhausted. Like it uses a ton of energy really fast, and then it's completely burnt out, right? This is your classic like Olympic sprinter or, Olympic like power lifter. Right. So 100-meter dash or like, Olympic, like, clean and jerk or like overhead snatch, right? Like that is definitely really short. So it immediately gets exhausted about 10 seconds and just totally worn out. And that's where this second energy system comes in. So now glycolysis is like, I got you, I can take over, right? So it comes in and then glycolysis takes over for about 30 seconds. And like I said, it can last sometimes up to about 2 minutes if you're really good at it. But for most people, it kind of lasts about 30 to 60 seconds. Meanwhile, in the background of all of this, you see this energy system right here is just slowly amping up. That's your long duration, aerobic, low intensity, very long duration energy system. And what would happen is this chart could extend forever. And that aerobic energy system would just kind of hold there, right? But every time you raise your intensity, you're kind of creating a new chart, if that makes sense. So those are our energy. Yeah, there we go. We can kind of see a version right here. This is great. So there's the glycolysis, this is the ATP-PC system and spent and gone, right? And then we got glycolysis. It's like, all right, we're working and we're spent, right? And then the oxidative system kind of keeps going just forever. And that's why we can do a marathon, which, can take you 4 hours, versus like an Olympic, versus like a 100-meter dash, which might take, 10 seconds. Different energy systems for different things. This is also why, like, we're not necessarily like machines, right? Like if you created a machine that can lift 200 pounds, right? And that's like, and you can, dial it up to maybe 400 pounds, right? That machine can work pretty much the same in both, right? It's going to be able to do, obviously it's lifting heavier weight, but like you turn the crank up, it's designed to be able to still do that, right? It's not going to get exhausted no matter how much weight it's lifting. We don't work that way. We have to like create fuel to be able to do our work. So when you give us a very little amount of work, we're able to do a lot of it over a very long duration time. But if you give us a lot of work and we got to get it done, right, we will be able to, work really, really hard, but we'll be exhausted pretty darn quickly. Those are kind of our 3 energy systems, right? We see the ATP-PC system, glycolysis, and then we have the aerobic system, which, like I said, itself consists of 3 little energy systems. So just going over the way this works, aerobic glycolysis is sort of the stopgap. We don't talk about aerobic glycolysis too much because it's kind of still just glycolysis. It's just generally the location where these things take place. They take place in different parts of the cell. Let's see here, animal cell. So where you're producing all this energy, right? Here's a very, very, very simple one. That's what I'm looking for. Well, the simpler the better in this example. Here's kind of your classic animal cell, right? We got the nucleus here. And then you see these little, they kind of look like, I think they look like potato bugs. These are your mitochondria. This is, you've probably heard that term before, the powerhouse of the cell, right? This is where we're really producing like a lot of energy. And then see, this is the cytoplasm. The inside of all your cells is this fluid material. So the cytoplasm is where glycolysis takes place, right? Like that's the, remember, that's the without oxygen sort of short duration intensity stuff, right? That's this stuff right here. That's glycolysis. It takes place in the goo. This is why it's without oxygen. It's underwater, you know, it's in the swampy part of your cell. Your mitochondria though, that is where your aerobic energy system takes place. So within the mitochondria, right, and the reason they're called the powerhouse of the cell, you are doing your aerobic glycolysis, you're doing the Krebs cycle, and you're doing the electron transport chain. So what those things are, the aerobic glycolysis is the stopgap as you're kind of switching between glycolysis to the aerobic energy system. It's still glycolysis, it's just taking place on the inside of the mitochondria. Really, there's not a big difference there. But then you have the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle is more commonly referred to as the citric acid cycle, or I don't know about more commonly, but that's what it is. It's the citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle. And this is basically creating ATP inside of the mitochondria by now adding some oxygen, thanks to eating the byproducts of glycolysis. So you will hand it off from glycolysis to the Krebs cycle, and the Krebs cycle is like, great, I got this. Brings in some oxygen, produces a little bit more ATP. And it also creates some byproducts, which is kind of funny, right? So those byproducts that it creates are these little high energy molecules called NAD and FAD, or NAD and FAD, if you want to call them that. And NAD and FAD are byproducts that got created when we produced ATP. And then they are going to go through the electron transport chain. And the electron transport chain is going to take NAD and FAD. It's going to add even more oxygen, and it's going to spit out even more ATP. So that's what's kind of cool about our energy systems, right? Let's track like a single molecule of glucose through our energy system right here, right? So let's pull up our little chart here, and we're going to watch one molecule of glucose in how it's getting used to produce ATP. So that molecule of glucose, let's say, actually, we'll go even further. We'll track it back even further. Let's say you eat a cookie, right? So that cookie has lots of glucose in it, high in sugar. And so it gets into your digestive system, the spit in your mouth breaks it down, then it passes into your stomach where the acids are going to further break down any of the proteins and things like that. And then it's going to pass into your small intestine. Some final breakdowns going to occur until eventually you're just left with nothing but little sugar molecules, which we call glucose. You're left with some amino acids, which are our proteins, and you're left with some free fatty acids. So the glucose passes into your blood. Okay, so it gets picked up by a red blood cell, goes through your liver to make sure that it, doesn't have any toxic stuff attached to it, and your liver is going to kind of detoxify if it needs to. And then that glucose molecule works its way to a cell, right? And you happen to be doing some squats, right? I don't know why you were eating cookies before you went to the gym. You were looking for a big carb boost, I guess. But now you're doing some body weight squats at the gym, and you're going to do you saw this challenge online or Instagram or whatever. And it's like, you're going to do 100 body weight squats in a row. Okay. And it's like, all right, cool. That's going to take a while, right? So what's going to happen is, the first couple times you start doing those squats, you're going to start in the ATP-PC system, right? That's where the energy production is going to begin. Then you are going to work your way into your glycolysis. And then as you keep doing your squats, because 100 is going to take definitely longer than, a minute, you're going to work your way into the aerobic energy system. But let's get back to that molecule of glucose, right? So that molecule of glucose goes into your cell, and it's just going to kind of wait for just a second, because your ATP-PC system actually doesn't need glucose. It is actually relying on the last time you created ATP. It's sort of your stored up ATP. That's why it only lasts 5 to 10 seconds. So it's going to go through that energy system, and then it's time to start producing ATP as we go. So that glucose molecule is going to work its way into one of your cells, okay? And it's going to go into the fluid portion of the cell. It's going to go into this gooey, wet, swampy area right here. And what's going to happen is it's going to get broken down into all of its individual components and rearranged, and you're going to get about 2 molecules of ATP from that 1 molecule of glucose. So now your cell's like, great, I got 2 molecules of ATP, and it uses those 2 molecules of ATP to do a little work, right? Now, here's the thing. It also created a bunch of byproduct while it did that. It also created a whole bunch of lactic acid. And the lactic acid is now in the cell along with what used to be glucose, right? So now you kind of got this critical mass of like lactic acid, but you keep doing squats. Your cell needs to keep doing work. So your cell's like, crap, we got to keep going. So what it's going to do now is it's going to drive some oxygen in. So a red blood cell is going to deliver some oxygen in a different red blood cell. And then oxygen is going to pass into a mitochondria. The mitochondria is going to take that lactic acid, and through the Krebs cycle, right in this section right here, through the Krebs cycle, it is going to produce 2 more molecules of ATP. And then it's also going to create another byproduct here. That other byproduct are these high energy molecules that I talked about earlier called NAD and FAD, or NAD and FAD. So now NAD and FAD are inside the mitochondria. The 2 molecules of ATP leave. The cell's like, great, I got 2 more ATP, so it does a little bit more work, right? And now NAD and FAD are going to go through the electron transport chain. It's going to add some more oxygen, and it's going to spit out about 34 molecules of ATP. And this is all from that initial glucose, right? So that glucose molecule became a little bit of energy, and it became lactic acid. The lactic acid became a little bit more energy, and then it became NAD and FAD. And now NAD and FAD are going to become a whole bunch of energy and a little bit of water. Maybe a byproduct of water at the end. And the water is just going to get, expelled. And that is sort of how our energy systems work. So when you think about like doing interval training, right? Like let's say you're doing cardio and you're doing that interval stuff where you take your intensity really high, and then you bring it really low. You take it really high and you bring it really low. What you're doing is you're training through several different energy systems. This is why cardio actually supports your strength training. And I know we all think of them as like diametrically opposed, right? Like we're always like, it's like, no, I'm not gonna do my cardio, I wanna keep my muscle, right? Or it's like, oh, my strength training doesn't feel like I'm getting enough cardio, I'm trying to improve my, aerobic, capacity. They support each other. They both support each other. You're making your muscles better at producing energy by doing cardio, and you're making your muscles stronger so that they can get more done with less work, which allow you to do more aerobic work in the other direction. So strength training supports cardio, cardio supports strength training. And we need to make sure that we definitely understand that if we are talking about training athletes. With athletes, this is extremely important, right? They need to be able to use all of these energy systems. If they're only good at one or the other, they're going to be ineffective at half of their sport. Like think about like a professional athlete, right? Think about like a professional let's say football player, right? They need to be really explosive coming off the line, but they also kind of need to be able to get back to that line and do their next play afterwards, right? Maybe that play lasts 10, 20 seconds. Then they got to get right back in line, get back, set up again, and then go consistently for the whole game, right? Obviously there's offensive and defensive switching, but like that still requires some endurance. And then think about like a basketball player, right? They're running back and forth the whole time, but then they have these big explosive moments where, they jump up super high in the air to like either make a shot or block a shot or dunk or something, right? So they need to have the ability to kind of work their way through all of these energy systems. So like I said, I know the energy system stuff kind of gets a little intimidating sometimes. Bae, I think this is the first time you've seen some of this. We didn't spend a ton of time on this last mod.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is definitely for now, think, just remember like the order that it kind of goes in. That's the big lesson to kind of take away from this one. And then memorize and think about the durations, right? The ATP-PC system is like your jet fuel, but it doesn't last very long, right? And then you've got glycolysis, which can last maybe 1 to 2 minutes. Honestly, 2 minutes is pushing it for most people. Professional athletes, sure, yeah, great, 2 minutes, but they're professional athletes. Glycolysis is sort of the middle, relatively high intensity, but still relatively like high duration as well. And then think of the aerobic energy system as like, infinite duration. Like I can run a marathon for several hours or go hiking for a bunch of hours, right? You're not at your highest intensity. You're not running during that hike. You're just kind of walking it out, right? So that's the kind of the takeaway from this PowerPoint. We'll get more into it later where we actually like break these down. Like I said, we got a 12-day class literally dedicated to energy production. So it'll really make a lot of sense and stuff. We got cardio coming next mod. But did anybody have any questions about the energy systems for right now? Questions, comments, concerns? Lorianne, you feeling good? Love it. Seeing the thumbs up. All right. So like I said, interval training is great because this is a really good way to use these multiple energy systems, right? Now, here's what's fun. Here's the fun side of all this. We get to target these things, and so now we're going to target these specific energy systems. And this is where we have, understanding the idea of like a target heart rate, right? You guys remember we just talked about this during our assessments class, right? Your max heart rate is going to be 220. It's always 220. It's just a flat number. 220 minus your age, right? And that is your heart rate max. So if I wanted you to be at like 80% of that heart rate max, I would say, 220 minus your age, which let's say you're 40 years old, right? That means it's 180. And I want you to be at 80% of that. So then I go times 0.8. And there we go. I'd say, hey, Jim, I want your heart rate to be around 144, right? But the thing is, that traditional old school formula, the 220 minus your age, it's not super accurate because it doesn't exactly take into account anybody's individual cardiorespiratory capabilities, right? Like if you have a heart that's in really good shape, this isn't really taking that into account. It's just basing it on your age. So we have a slightly better formula, which is going to be the regression formula. This is also commonly used in athletes. Actually, I haven't talked about this formula too much, but this is one that they add into the sports book. There's the regression formula, which typically just applies to athletic populations. And that's very similar. It's still like a flat number minus your age, but this time it's 208 minus 70% of your age. Don't worry about having this one memorized. You're not going to get any questions about the regression formula at any point. Just know that this is another way that you can do it. I don't talk about it very often because like it's not the one that NASM uses. But if you do have like an athlete and you don't have time to do the full Karpinen method, you can use the regression formula. I don't know. The thing is, like, if you're going to take the time, just do the good one, do the Karpinen. Like, I can't think of the last, now there's calculators online, like, I can't think of the last time I even did just the regular heart rate max formula without, the only reason I use it is so I can do the Karpinen, you know what I mean? Speaking of Karpinen, or the heart rate reserve formula, remember guys, they will call it either version. I don't know which one they will call it. They use them both interchangeably. But the Karpinen method, or heart rate reserve, a little bit more of a complicated formula here, right? It's your max heart rate, and then you take away your resting heart rate. But that right there is great because like by taking away your resting heart rate, you are basing the heart rate calculations on the client specifically, because everybody might be 30 years old in a room, right? Like everybody in a room could all be 40 years old. They could all be the exact same age, but they will have very different resting heart rates depending on how good of shape they are in, right? So now we're getting a customized version. So, You take the heart rate rest away from the heart rate max, then you multiply it by your intensity. And then because we took the heart rate rest away, we have to add it on at the end. So, we take our 40-year-old client from earlier, 220 minus his age. Nope, he's 40, not 80. 220 minus 40, which gives us 180, right? And then let's say his resting heart rate is 60 beats per minute. So then we subtract 60 from that. Then we multiply it by 80%, so times 0.8. And then we add back on that resting heart rate of 60 at the end. So now, in the first version, it assumed he wasn't in very good shape. So it gave him a target heart rate of 144. Now he gets a target heart rate of 156. So maybe the first version wasn't even that hard of a workout. So, or AKA not a workout, right? So this is why we like the carbonate method much better. And that's the one that, like I said, you guys don't ever actually have to do that math if you don't want to. You can literally just type in carbonate calculator, or you can find an app on the App Store. But we look at our client here, right? He was 40 years old. His resting heart rate was 60. We hit calculate, and there's all of our zones. 80%, like I said, 156. So this is a much easier way to do it. Just use the calculator out there, guys. Like, you don't really have to do that math yourself. So now let's take a look at a kind of a fun concept. So why would all this be so important to talk about? Well, number one, different athletes are going to have different energy needs. Like I told you guys, I like to play like a lot of ultimate frisbee, which is a very cardio-based sport. And let me tell you, this weekend was exceptionally cardio-based. But when you think about it, like, it's a super, super long duration sport. Points will last quite some time, and you play both sides of the field. You play offense and defense. So, it's kind of similar to soccer in a way. It's a big long field. I'll show you guys we'll look up a fun ultimate frisbee highlight. It's a big long field, and you can see here this guy is going to pitch it to that guy, and he came in and made a great steal, right? Actually, he made a Callahan, which is where you steal it and score in the end zone simultaneously, which is really impressive. I think he spikes it right in front of that guy, which is not cool. But you can see, big long sprints. And look at this guy. He's going to run all the way down the field and make a diving catch, right? And then he immediately chips off to his teammate who also did a big long run. So a lot of sprinting involved, right? A lot of long duration. Now it's immediately going to turn over, and they're going to start going back the other way right away. So this is a very low intensity, long duration cardio situation. But then you look at those big intense sprints that they have to do in the short term, right? That's very much a high intensity, short duration situation. So athletes are working in a blend of these energy systems all the time. We want to make sure that we are training for all of them if you're training an athlete, right? And they burn different levels of calories. Obviously, the higher the intensity, the more calories you're going to burn. The lower intensity, well, you might not burn very many calories, but the benefit is maybe you can do them for a really long time. This is where interval training really comes in. Interval training is great because you get the benefits of high intensity work while recovering with the low intensity duration, which is really, really nice. So yeah, like I said, different athletes require different things. Now there is, when we are looking at this and we are looking at how this oxygen and stuff is used, there's a term that we're going to use that's called your respiratory quotient. Okay, this is your RQ. Your respiratory quotient is the amount of CO2 expired versus the amount of oxygen consumed. So I know, if I asked anybody in here right now for a really basic description of what breathing is, a basic but still scientific description, you'd probably say this, right? You'd probably say something along the lines of well, you breathe in oxygen so that your body can have that oxygen, and then you exhale CO2. Right? Yeah, that's great. That's a really good description, you know. But it's not, the one problem is that until you take a second to think about it a little bit deeper, is that, so it's like, if I brought in 10 units of oxygen, do I exhale 10 units of CO2? Well, not really, not unless I'm using all of that oxygen. A lot of the oxygen you bring in with every breath doesn't get used. Some of it you breathe in and you use a lot of it, and then some of it you just exhale, like, I didn't need that. And so you exhale a little bit of oxygen and CO2. So your respiratory quotient is the ratio of that. Okay, it's the amount of CO2 versus the amount of oxygen you brought in. So let's say you exhaled 10 units of CO2, right? But you brought in, let's say, 7 units of oxygen, right? So you exhaled, I'm sorry, that you can't do that. You exhaled 10 units of CO2, but you brought in, we'll say, 14 units of oxygen, right? So 10 divided by 14, you have a respiratory quotient of 0.71. Okay, so 71% of the oxygen that you brought in got consumed, it got used up. So that's what your RQ is, right? It's your respiratory quotient. It's the amount of CO2 that you ended up like exhaling because you consumed most of the oxygen. So this is a more sophisticated way to determine like where someone is working. So when we look at respiratory quotient here, this is one of the ways that we can tell how hard someone is working. So let's say I brought in 10 units of oxygen and I exhaled 3 units of oxygen, right? Well, that means that there were 3 units of oxygen left. I only consumed about 70% of what I brought in. My intensity is very, very low. In fact, it is as low as it ever gets. So yeah, let me look this back up. I want to see the chart. Yeah, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the close. Let's try chart. Is that gonna give me what I want? Oh, we're getting there. There it is. Cool. Okay. So take a look. You're gonna be anywhere from an RQ of 1.0 to about 0.7. So here's the thing. You're always going to consume at minimum about 70% of the oxygen that you bring in. But that remaining 30% is your entire athletic spectrum. So like if you're consuming, let's say you brought in 10 units of oxygen and you exhaled 10 units of CO2, 10 divided by 10, that means that you consumed all of the oxygen you brought in. like there is no oxygen left. The only thing leaving your mouth is pure carbon dioxide. That means you are working as absolutely hard as you can. That is you in the middle of your super intense sprint where you're like, afterwards you're like, oh my God. like that cardio moment where, you know, you're racing uphill, right? That is an RQ of 1.0. Okay. Like I'm gonna die. It's like, you're not gonna die. No, I feel like I'm gonna die. You know, like there is no oxygen being exhaled. It is pure carbon dioxide at this point. Okay. But then there's the opposite of that. What about the complete flip side of that? The RQ of 0.7. Like I said, you are always going to be at an RQ of at least 0.7. 70% of the oxygen that you drive into your lungs will get consumed. So if an RQ of 1.0 is a maximum intensity sprint, you guys tell me, what is an RQ of 0.7? What time of day are you at an RQ of 0.7? Little pop quiz for you guys. Come on, somebody help me out. if consuming all of the oxygen puts you at an RQ of 1.0 because you are working as hard as you can, what is the exact opposite of working as hard as you can? Are you guys still with me? Do I still have a class?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's when you're sleeping, right? If you were completely unconscious, totally passed out, right? You are burning very few calories, but you are still consuming some oxygen because you have to keep the cells in your body alive. So you're always in a blend of the lowest intensity up to the highest intensity. You're somewhere on that spectrum at any given time. That's what the RQ is describing. Now, being able to measure this requires one of these machines. It requires like a VO2 tester. So like, pretty sure you're not going to have your client attached to this tube constantly. So we are basing we are going to base our zones on like where these have been measured before. So generally, as a rule of thumb, your training zones, we're going to break this into zones 1, 2, and 3. Okay. A zone 1 is going to be an RQ of about 0.8 up to about 0.9. So we're going to want to be anywhere from about here up to about here. This is your zone 1. Okay, this section right in here. Zone 2 is going to be like 0.9 up to 1.0. So like you might take yourself all the way up to fully consuming all the oxygen you've got. And then zone 3 is this sort of theoretical above 1.0. Now, above 1.0 should sound like it's impossible, and that's because it is, right? It's like you can't consume more than 100% of your oxygen, right? So that means like if you're up here, you are at your maximum intensity, right? That's really what that's why what they're indicating with that. So when I say like an RQ of 0.8 to 0.9, that's really hard to measure without one of those VO2 machines. So what do we do instead? Well, this should sound very, very, very familiar because we just talked about this during assessments. You are going to put your client at about 65 up to about 75% of their heart rate max. That will put them at an RQ of 0.8 to 0.9. So we call that zone 1. This is also known as like your fat burning zone or your cardio base. This is like your foundation, right? Or if you are doing like intense interval training, this could be your recovery zone. So what's great about this is it's really good for getting you to like be able to do long duration jogs and stuff. But the problem with it is that you plateau really, really quickly when you train in this zone. And that's where our other zones come in. So then we have zone 2 instead. Zone 2 is going to be about 80 to 85% of your heart rate max. That'll put you, if you get it up to about 85% of your heart rate max, you will eventually run out of breath. You can't keep that up for like a very long duration. So this is higher intensity, very close to that anaerobic threshold where you're going to run out of air, right? Can't stay in this zone for a very long time, but you can get in there for a little while, which is really nice if you're doing interval training. Then we got zone 3. And this is like, you know, the rubber meets the road, high intensity, 90% or higher of your heart rate max. This is your peak training. When you are trying to get better at sprints, this is what we're looking for, right? You can keep this up for seconds instead of minutes, okay? So we want our clients to work between like a blend of these things, right? We want our clients to maybe do like, you know, this many seconds in this zone and this many seconds in that zone. And that's what interval training is. So we are going to calculate what's called your target heart rate. And your target heart rate is based on the Karpinen method, right? We are going to come up with these specific numbers that we're going to tell our clients to hit. It's like, hey, I want you to be, you know, at this zone here, at this target heart rate. So here's when we're writing our program, right? If we're writing a program, if we're doing a little bit of program design here. Oh, actually, hold on. I got to talk about the benefits of interval training before I do that. Interval training, by the way, like I said, it's really, really great because obviously you can't keep up zone 2 or zone 3. You can't do that for a long duration. It's literally impossible. You know, you do not have the cells to be able to get it done. So instead, what we do is we tap into those high intensity intervals, right? We get into the high intensity, super maximum heart rate zones, and then we recover in the low intensity, right? So we get up, our heart rate gets really high, we start to get out of breath, and then we recover, get our breath back, and then we take it back up and we do it again. And we sort of do this like zigzag thing, right? That's interval training. Nice thing about that is you get the benefits of burning extra calories because of the high intensity work that you're doing. This will increase your metabolic rate, sometimes up to about 72 hours, which is really nice. It's not monotonous, it's a little more fun. And it is mirroring the sports that you might be playing. You know, like in Ultimate, when you score, you have to walk back, you know, the team that didn't score has to walk back to the other side of the field. That's a chance for you to kind of catch your breath and recover and get ready for the next play. That is a form of interval training, right? So we really like interval training. It's very, 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 very good for us. Now, we don't want to do interval training with every client though, because we need to build a foundation before we get into it. So as much as I love interval training, I would not do it with a beginner client. So getting into the program design side of things here again, let's look at NASM's OPT model. Like I said, you've got 3 levels, right? You've got clients who are in the stabilization level. You've got clients who are in the strength level. And you've got clients who are in the power level. I just remembered I made a chart last time to show this. Did I do cardio? I did. God dang it. All right. So if we take a look right here, right? If our client is in the stabilization level, just like we talked about on Friday, what do they get? They get corrective flexibility, right? Corrective flexibility, that's SMR and static stretches. Well, they are also going to get stage 1 cardio routines. Stage 1 cardio routines are the monotonous kind of basic cardio that you might be thinking of. Go for a jog. That's it. You know, like we want you to be between 65 and 75% of your heart rate max for about 30 minutes. You know, if they can maintain that for a full 30 minutes, they're probably ready for stage 2. So we are going to kind of break this down. They're using a little bit of different language here, but we're going to break down our cardio into, you know, base training where we build our foundation, interval training where we start to introduce, you know, high intensity intervals, linear training where we start focusing on like maximum speed, multi-directional training where we start to focus on agility, and then sports specific training, which is like, you know, if you're a football player, you're going to catch a football. If you're a basketball player, you're going to catch a basketball. If you're an ultimate frisbee player, you're going to catch a frisbee. That's where we start to get into the SAQ. That's where SAQ meets cardio. But for now, guys, what I want you to focus on is just base training and interval training. That's what we're looking at. So base training, AKA stage 1, it's the base, it's restart. It's only going to consist of zone 1. That's it. It's literally just zone 1 all by itself. You can be in here maybe 1 to 8 weeks, depending on who the client is. And that's all it is, right? So with, you know, this foundational stuff, your RQ is going to be anywhere from about 0.8 to 0.9. And this is going to, you know, which means it's going to be good for fat burning. This is the fat burning zone. This is your cardio base, right? So here's an example of how I wrote this out in a routine. Let's say you get a client who's strength training on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Their cardio routine would look like this. You give them zone 1 on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Pretty freaking simple stuff, right? You know, when we look at this little chart here, right, it's zone 1 all by itself. So again, Lorianne, you're my lone newbie this morning because Thomas is in the evening class. But if your client is a stabilization client, you give them stage 1. You say, all right, your target heart rate is this number to this number, because that's your zone 1. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool. Like I said, honestly, these program design classes, I jokingly said this in class one time. It's a painting class, but it's a paint by numbers painting class. You know, it's like, where's my client? They're here. They get this, you know. You're literally just going to look at the chart. Now, let's say you've been working with them for a month, and now they're getting better. Well, now we're going to introduce level 2, which is where we're going to start introducing interval training. So this is phases 2, 3, and 4. So if your client is in the strength level, right, that's any of these 3 phases. Like I said on Friday, they're going to get active flexibility. They're also going to get stage 2 cardio routines. That is going to use zones 1 and zones 2. So now they're going to get into an interval, maybe all the way up to 85% of their heart rate max, and then they will recover between 65 and 75% of their heart rate max. So you could write a workout, like we'll see here in this little picture, where you've got them, only pay attention to day 2, don't look at day 3 here. But you would look at it like this, right? You would look and see, all right, I'm going to warm you up for about 5 to 10 minutes here. And then you're going to do, you know, a little bit of time in zone 2, and then you're going to recover back in zone 1. And you're just going to kind of bounce back and forth between those 2. And that is sort of the introduction to interval training that we're seeing there, right? And then finally, we're going to get into level 3. These are our, you know, 5th phase clients or whatever. Level 3 here, they get functional flexibility like we talked about on Friday, but then they get stage 3 cardio routines. And you'll see like stage 3 is zones 1, 2, and zone 3. So maybe they do a little bit in zone 3, drop back into zone 1 to recover. Zone 2, back into zone 1 to recover. Zone 3, 1 to recover. 3, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1. That's one way to do it. Or you could go 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, right? Whatever you want your intervals to look like, guys. There's a million different like fun variations you can come out with there, right? Let's say I'm training a client and, you know, I've got them doing a combination of like a boxing circuit, jumping rope, and doing burpees, right? Burpees, you know, that evil exercise where you have to do the push-up and then the jump and then the push-up and the jump, right? Very freaking tough. Jumping rope, that's something you can do for kind of a long duration. If you're jumping rope kind of slowly, it's a good way to actually catch your breath. I know it's cardio, but like, you know, as long as you're good at it, it's actually probably low intensity cardio. So I would say, all right, I want you to do 30 seconds of burpees followed by 30 seconds of working the bag. And then we're going to do 2 minutes of jumping rope. So I'm using the burpees for my zone 3. I'm using the work in the bag for zone 2. And then they're going to jump rope for about 2 minutes and recover in zone 1 before they reset. And then they just do, you know, that would take, what was it, 2 minutes plus 1 minute? So that'd take 3 minutes. So if I did 7 rounds of that, 20-minute cardio routine, you know? So this is what that would kind of look like. By the way, in a weekly schedule, I forgot to do the weekly schedule for level 2. Really quickly, looking at level 1, they strength train Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. They do zone 1 on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, right? Then if they're a stage 2 client, we'd have like strength training again on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. But we wouldn't just do stage 2 with them the entire time for their cardio days, because that might be overtraining, because stage 2 is pretty intense, right? So we have a stage 2 day, followed by a stage 1 day, back to stage 2, and the next week I'd flip them around. 1, 2, 1. And then lastly, I got my level 3 client, right? Strength, 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 and then stage 3 cardio, stage 2 cardio, stage 1 cardio. And that, by doing that, ensures that I'm not pushing my client too hard. They're not doing that super maximum intensity all the friggin' time, and all of a sudden they blow out their ACL or something, you know? I'm giving them days of recovery built in. All right, so that is our cardio guide. Any questions on any of that, guys? I got in the weeds a little bit with the ATP stuff, but I actually really love talking about that stuff. Any questions on the stages or on the zones? Bay's feeling good. Andres, Lorianne, Dalen, you guys feeling good?
Yes, sir.
All righty. Getting toasty in here. We're getting into the summer. All right. So let's look at core stuff. All right. So now let's say, you've done a little bit of cardio with your client and you want to do your strength training days. And so you take your client through their warm up. And now it is time to break them into the movement prep, which is the, warm up is over, like post warm up, but like pre-workout section, right? So movement prep, we're looking at an OPT sheet, right? Now that we've kind of addressed this whole section in cardio, now we're starting to get into this, right? We're just going to do the first third today, and then tomorrow we'll do balance and reactive training. But a tight core, a well-developed, like a strong core is incredibly important for really anybody, but especially for athletes, right? We don't want our athletes to blow out their back, So our objectives are to understand how core training is related to performance enhancement, talk about the different systems within your core, why it's important, and at the end we'll talk about like how to design an actual core training program. So when I say your core, really quickly, let's get this out of the way. I do not mean your abs, right? That's like saying all soda is Coke, which if you go to the South, people will say. Has anybody ever noticed that? If you go down South, they're like, what type of Coke do you want? And you're like, what? And it's like, you want Sprite? And it's like, it's kind of a funny thing. It's like when people say like Band-Aid when they need bandages, or they say Kleenex instead of tissue. It's like the brand name has kind of become the product. Your abs are not the only part of your core. Your core is the entire lumbopelvic hip complex. Your glutes are part of your core. So really quickly, now that that's out of the way, right? It is the stabilizing muscles that hold your spine in place. It is also the moving muscles that actually manipulate your spine. And it's the muscles that are attaching your spine to your appendages, right? I've got, my pelvis is attached to my spine and I need to be able to move that pelvis, right? Your core needs to be able to accelerate, concentrically producing force. It needs to be able to decelerate, eccentrically producing force. And it needs to be able to dynamically stabilize and make sure that nothing falls out of place, right? Here's the problem. Most people actually have a really strong movement system, but a very underdeveloped stabilization system. So most people are actually pretty good at moving their spine around this world, but they are not so good at holding all of their individual discs in place. So we want to make sure that we are focusing on developing their core. Think about how many people, we were just having this conversation when we met the other day about how people love to do extra work when they're at the gym. They love to do like, that Superman exercise and pull their head up, right? Or they like to do chest presses and do this extra little push here, right? You don't need to do all that stuff, right? Well, the same thing is true of like core exercises. Like people don't do planks, they like to do sit-ups because sit-ups seem like it's more kinetic. It seems like there's more going on. It seems like it's doing more work, right? So a proper core training program needs to address that and learn how to stabilize the spine, right? So when we look at like ensuring that like a proper core, once your core is in a good place, it gives you more proprioception. Your body's going to have better awareness. It's going to put you in a more, we call it biomechanically advantageous position, which basically means that like if your spine is in alignment, your pelvis will be in alignment. And if your pelvis is in alignment, then your muscles can recruit the way they're supposed to, and you can produce maximum force velocity. Think about like, you think about like the freaking high jump that you'll see people do sometimes, where they do these crazy big jumps. Oh, I jumped right past it. I mean, look at how far that person's jumping, right? It's wild stuff. without like a strong core and being able to hold their spine in place, when he lands, he'd likely blow out his back, right? So it's obviously important when we're talking about athletes, but it's important with everybody. Remember that statistic I mentioned during the assessments class? 80% of people will suffer from chronic low back pain at some point in their life. If we learn how to stabilize our core and hold our core in place, we wouldn't have so many of those problems. So we're going to break your core into 3 groups, okay? We're going to break it into the local stabilization system, the global stabilization system, and the movement system or the global movement system, okay? So the local stabilization system are all of the muscles that are in charge of stabilizing your vertebrae. So the local stabilization system holds your spine in place, okay? These are muscles such as your transverse abdominis, which is that sort of like webbing in the front of your abs that creates intra-abdominal pressure. It's your internal obliques, that's the innermost part of your oblique muscles. It's your multifidus, which are all these little tiny muscles along the low back here. Your pelvic floor muscles, which would be underneath down here, and your diaphragm up top. So when we think about like the local stabilization system, actually, this is a great picture right here. Transverse abdominis, internal obliques, multifidus, pelvic floor muscles, and diaphragm. These are all of the muscles that are holding your spine in the way they're supposed to. I always like to think of it as like a Jenga box. You know, like if your spine is your vertebrae are kind of like this, well, this box that goes around is what holds it in place when you're trying to move it, you know, take it over to a friend's house for game night. You know, you're trying to hold it in place. So think of it this way, right? You've got the transverse abdominis in the front, the lumbar multifidus in the back. You've got the internal obliques on both sides, pelvic floor muscles, and diaphragm. It's creating the 6 sides to your box, right? It holds everything in place. So that's what the local stabilization system does. It provides intervertebral stability, aka it holds all your vertebrae. It aids in proprioception. Again, it's going to give you better body awareness. And this is the list of muscles. TVA, that's your transverse abdominis, multifidi, or multifidus, your internal obliques, pelvic floor muscles, and diaphragm. Now, like I said, this is the one that people usually don't work on because you don't get to see it, right? This isn't your 6-pack. This is underneath your 6-pack. This is your things that are focusing on not moving. When we think of exercise, we think of all the movement. We're like, oh, I'm supposed to move a lot, right? Well, not if you're training a local stabilization system. If you train a local stabilization system, you really want to learn how to not move. So that's where if you do, well, let's say you do want to move, right? Let's say you want to move the spine. Well, that's where the global stabilization system comes in. The global stabilization system are the muscles that attach your pelvis to your spine. And their job is to transfer loads between your extremities and the spine, okay? So these are muscles that actually like move your spine around, okay? So the global stabilization system looks something kind of like this. Ooh, that is low. So these are muscles like your quadratus lumborum, that's your QL. Muscles back here that are in your low back that basically lift your pelvis up like this, like side to side, or a little bit of this as well. Your psoas, which are on the front, attaching to your hips, right? You've got your external obliques, right? Your rectus abdominis, your 6-pack, right? That's actually moving your spine, it's crunching you, right? Or your erector spinae, which is the exact opposite, right? That's erecting your spine this way. And then a little bit of your glutes and a little bit of your adductors even, right? So these are all those vanity muscles that we're trying to carve out to get to the beach, right? That's your global stabilization system. It's all the muscles that are kind of surrounding the area. So your local stabilization system is attached to the spine directly, holding the spine in place. Your global stabilization is what moves your spine around. Then you've got your movement system, which is muscles that attach your pelvis and your spine to your extremities. So this is actually like your lats that are attaching like my arms to the rest of my spine, my glutes, right, which are attaching, my pelvis to my spine, right? So lats, hip flexors, hamstrings, and quads, right? All of those are moving my extremities around. So when you think about it, like generally, whoops, wrong button. Oh shoot, where'd it go? Generally, think about it, like a lot of people generally tend to focus on moving all those Vandy muscles. They get really good at moving those. Plus, we use these in our everyday lives probably the most often. So the movement system gets overdeveloped. The global stabilization system is sometimes people who work out at home without any guidance generally tend to strengthen their global stabilization system, but then they lack local stabilization system. So it's like a lot of people have a really strong movement system. Some people have a strong global stabilization system. And then very few people have a strong local stabilization system. That's arguably the most important one because that's the one that keeps your spine in alignment. If you're worried about herniating a disc, you need to strengthen your local stabilization system. Lorianne, we were just talking about how you were like, you want to work on your core stuff, right? And I was talking about how we do the McGill Big Three, which I know I talk about this all the time, but I'm obsessed with it. These three exercises, right? The McGill Crunch, the side plank, and the bird dog. Those three movements, and then you can always modify the side plank. And you can always modify the crunch a little bit. These three movements right here are all movements that focus on not moving the spine, right? They're teaching your spine how to hold the position it's supposed to be able to hold. And so like that is the local stabilization system in a nutshell. The side plank gets the internal obliques. The bird dog gets the multifidus. And the McGill sit-up gets the transverse abdominis. So let's talk about writing a program, right? So if we're looking at this, right, actually, hold on. Scientific rationale for why we need to do all this. I've already said this already, but low back pain, right, we know is very, 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 can't stop saying it, common. 80% of people, good Lord. That is so many people. And so because low back pain is so common, we need to do a lot of core training and we need to make sure it's systematic and progressive. We should build a foundation on the local stabilization system first, then work into the movement systems later, right? Core training is great because it can improve your pain and discomfort. It can improve your function. And obviously that means it's going to improve your performance. Looking at this, the rationale as well in terms of athletes, we know that like it's a great way to avoid various injuries. We know that like it can actually increase your vert. Dalen, this is looking at you. I know you said you want to get your dunk back. Core strength is a big part of that actually. It helps with your vertical jump, your vertical agility, your takeoff and speed. That's going to be all very, very important. But like I said, it should always be systematic, it should always be progressive, and it should be functional. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to manipulate different parts of our core training. We are going to focus on not moving the spine, then we're going to focus on moving the spine, then we're going to focus on moving the spine quickly. And we know that we want to focus on stability. So eventually we can start adding what we call proprioceptively enriched environments. Big, super crazy fancy way just to say something wobbly. We're going to start adding unstable environments. By doing unstable environments, our clients can, focus on that stabilization. So I love the stability ball crunch. This exercise is great. However, it is focused on moving the spine. So as much as I love this exercise, and it's, really great for moving your spine, I won't start with this. I will start with a plank. We will do this exercise first, but learn how to hold the spine in one position. Once my client's good at that, then I can start moving their spine. And then eventually I can start doing like a ball crunch with a throw, something super explosive where they have to like move their spine really, really, really rapidly, right? So those are sort of the three different levels that we've got here. So your program needs to focus on intervertebral stability, lumbopelvic stability, and movement efficiency. And the way you're going to do that is you're going to use the OPT model. So going back to Nassim's OPT chart here, if we take a look at it, if we have a client who is in the stabilization level, right? That client is in level 1. Well, the type of exercises that we're going to pick are core stabilization exercises. Now, how do you know if something's a core stabilization exercises? Well, there's two approaches to this, guys. You can either try to memorize every core stabilization exercise that's in your textbook and remember that it is a core stabilization exercise. So you can try to do that. Or, and by the way, you do that by looking at this list. Where's my list? There it is. So this is a list of every exercise in your book. Well, there's a list of every stabilization exercise in your book. So you can go down here and look at the core stuff and memorize 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 exercises and memorize the fact that like these 8 exercises are all core stabilization exercises. Or you could learn the defining characteristics of what makes something a core stabilization exercise. And that's what I want to teach you. So, core stabilization exercises, what are they? Well, they're reserved for clients in the stabilization level, level 1, or phase 1. And what they are is they are core exercises that involve little to no movement of the spine. Okay, they are in charge of developing intervertebral stabilization. It is all about learning how to not move your spine, right? So it's not just sit-ups, it's not just crunches. It talks about not moving your spine. You're going to focus on exercises where you can perform what is called the draw-in maneuver. The draw-in maneuver is basically while you are exercising, pull your belly button towards your spine, right? And you are going to focus on bracing. And bracing is where you do that where you're, right? And you squeeze. When someone throws something at you and you go, squeeze your abs, that's bracing basically. So by doing both of those things, especially the draw-in maneuver in particular, you are going to activate your local and global stabilization systems. So you are learning how to stabilize your spine. If you can only do one at a time, focus on the draw-in maneuver. But bracing is also very, very helpful. So what are some good examples of this? Well, the prone iso abs, which is Nassim's big fancy way of saying the plank, is a really good example of this. Or you can see the side iso abs, right, like she's doing here. That's a really good example. And then she can make it harder by lifting one leg up off the ground each time, right? And that makes each version just a slightly more difficult. Again, how do we enhance the difficulty of this exercise? We don't add weight. We're not doing a plank with a plate on our back, which I've seen people do. You can do that. But we're not adding weight. What we're doing is we're making it more unstable, right? Because the goal here isn't to be able to lift heavier. The goal is to stabilize. So by lifting one leg up off the ground, you increase the need for more stability. So then your spine holds and learns how to stabilize. Does that make sense, everybody? How's everybody feel on that? Is that pretty clear? So let's take a look at clients who are in level 2. If our if our client is in the strength level, we're going to give them core strength exercises. What the heck is a core strength exercise? Well, like I said, that's going to be on this checklist, by the way. That's going to be things like the ball crunch or back extensions, reverse crunches, rotations, all the stuff where you are now moving your spine. Okay, so core strength exercises, they're great, right? If your client's in level 2 and they've learned how to stabilize their spine and they have graduated into level 2, advanced from level 1, cool. This is where we're going to get in, right? Core strength exercises. They are exercises that involve a full dynamic, concentric, and eccentric range of movement of the spine. So in our last version, we did a plank. We held ourselves in place, right? Now we're doing things like ball crunching or a crunch with a rotation, right? Now we are moving our spine, right? So here's a ball crunch. Here's a ball crunch with rotation. Here's a long lever crunch. Here's a long lever crunch with rotation. A wood chop would be a good example. A Russian twist would be a good example. Hanging leg raises would be a good example. Anything where you are moving your spine is going to be a core strength exercise. So again, we're seeing some differences here, right? We started building a foundation of not moving the spine. We built upon that foundation by starting to actually move the spine through a full range of motion. And then we got our peak clients, right? We got our clients who are in the power level, right? Well, power clients, they're going to get core power exercises. What the heck is a core power exercise? Well, like I said, it's all the exercises on this list right here. Core power. Rotation chest passes, medicine ball pullover throws, oblique throws, soccer throws, right? All these things were being really explosive and we're moving our spine super quickly. So now, level 3 clients who are in phase 5, they are going to get core power exercises, which are core exercises that involve a full range of motion of the spine. So that sentence is literally the same, but then we add this little bit at the end. At functionally applicable, aka fast speeds. So we look at the medicine ball pullover throw, right? Where he's literally chucking a medicine ball at a fast speed, or a rotation chest pass where he is throwing a medicine ball at fast speeds. So, if I were working from my local stabilization system to my global stabilization system to my global movement system, I would have started with a plank for my transverse abdominis. Then I would do a ball crunch for my rectus abdominis, right? I went from local to global. Then I'm going to do a medicine ball pullover throw where I start using my lats and my core together, working on my global movement system. Let's go to the back side, right? Let's go to the back of the box, right? I would start by doing like a prone cobra, right? That where you're laying on the back and you just lift and you hold your spine in place, right? Or maybe I do a bird dog. I do a bird dog. And I'm stabilizing my multifidus, right? So now I'm working my multifidus by stabilizing. Then, right, I do some back extensions, like on that back extension machine, right? And I start working my low back there. I start working on my erector spinae, maybe a little bit of QL action, if I do a little like slight rotation. And then eventually I get into a reverse medicine ball throw, right, where I chuck it overhead backwards. And I start working a little bit of like the shoulders, right? What about the sides, right? What if I start working on the sides? Well, I would start on like a side plank. Then I would maybe do some, so maybe like a wood chop, right? And then eventually I would get into a medicine ball soccer throw, right? Something explosive where I, go super rotationally explosive. So again, I'm working from local to global to movement. Building a foundation first, never taking a brand new client and making them do a medicine ball pull overthrow or something. Because that is not systematic. It's not progressive, right? I didn't start and then, work my way up. I was just like, no, we're just going to give you the fun, hard stuff, that's not safe for my client. It doesn't do my client any favors by, they're not going to be good at it, which isn't going to be effective. So I'm building a foundation in the stabilization level, and then I'm growing that foundation every single phase. So again, in the interest of looking at this as paint by numbers, right? We've got our 3 levels. We got the stabilization level, the strength level, and the power level, right? If you are talking about core training, there's core strength, there's core stabilization, there's core strength, and there's core power. Tomorrow, we're going to be looking at balance. And guess what? Balance stabilization, balance strength, balance power. We'll be looking at reactive stabilization, reactive strength, reactive power. So it does all kind of come together. It's all paint by numbers, right? By the way, and this is so annoying, one thing I want to mention for the next couple of days, guys, I know I've mentioned how there are 5 phases. You're going to start to see in the next couple of days worth of slides, you will see at the end of every PowerPoint, it will mention phase 6. Phase 6 does not necessarily actually exist, at least not to you guys. There are only 5 phases in the regular textbook. Phase 6 is what is sports specific training. So anytime you are moving out of the OPT model to do stuff that is directly, like if you are doing football stuff, soccer stuff, rugby stuff, right? That's your phase 6. It is the sports specific maximal power stuff. So you will see that for the next couple of days. It's only in this textbook. I'm here to teach you the regular textbook, phases 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that's what everything looks like. So I just checked Canvas at the beginning of class. I need to put these checklists up there so you guys can download them. I will attach them to today's email so that you can have them. But I don't know why it wasn't, I don't know why it's up on Canvas. I don't know if I forgot in the past or if it got deleted or what, but I'll add it to Canvas here in just a minute. Any questions today, guys? Lorianne, Andres, Bay, Dalen, you guys feeling good?
No questions.
Love it.
Okay.
Lorianne, hey,
all right.
What's that?
I'm okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
Bay, this is your second time seeing it. Do you feel like more of an expert this time around? Nope. Maybe. All right, guys. I'll let y'all out of here. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. All right. See ya.
Bye, Brad. I'll email you. Thank you for everything.
Yeah, of course.
Bye.
Mm-hmm.